Hey, everybody, this is Jeff. We're going to talk about it tonight. This is a special show for me because let me see. I got to make sure my camera's right here. I'm going to be doing the show tonight with a good friend, someone who's taught me quite a bit. I actually call her my mentor with regard to the ancient world. Dr. Dinah Dye, who's we did a show for 2.5 years um, on the podcast, and so we're going to show that too tonight. But this is kind of an important show, and I see people are coming in to the program. There's something wrong with the feed for Rumble, so we're not going to be going on Rumble Live tonight. But that's the page that I want you guys to focus on when having to deal with me, or if you want to follow anything I do. Please go onto my Rumble page, which is Free From Fear, and do me the favor and follow me there, because as we grow the show for whatever time we have, I'm going to keep doing the stuff that we're doing. And I want to thank you all for joining me as well. Tonight, my guest is going to be Dr. Dinah Dye. Now, I want to read something to you guys about her. She was raised in Ottawa, Canada, in a conservative Jewish home. She attended Hebrew school, celebrated the festivals with her family, and enjoyed summers at an Orthodox Jewish summer camp. Dinah spent her teen years and early 20s deeply involved in the New Age movement. She at one time called herself a wandering Jew. During those years, she came to the belief that the truth would be based on three things. It would be easy to understand. Number one, it would be for everyone, and it would be based on love. She met that truth in 1979 in Yeshua, who the church calls Jesus the Messiah. Dinah served in a number of teaching positions with Assemblies of God and was the director of the Bible Institute for Foursquare International. She has also taught in a variety of media venues, including GLC, God's Learning Channel, Sun Broadcasting in New Mexico, and Brad TV in South Korea. Dinah recognized the importance of connecting Gospels and the epistles to their foundations in the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Bible. That understanding led to the creation of her ministry, Foundation in Torah. Dinah Dye holds a DMIN in Hebraic Studies, and Christianity has been teaching the Hebrew foundation of the New Testament for nearly 40 years. Think about that, folks. For 40 years, Dinah has bringing the Torah and the information that 3/4 of the Bible is based on to New Testament believers for the most part. She speaks regularly at conferences and for local congregations throughout the United States, Canada, and internationally. Currently, Dr. Dinah Dye, we're not doing that show anymore, but we have the Returning to Eden, which we're going to run a video tonight to kind of show you what that was all about. And that Returning to Eden, the podcast on Podbean, is still live. So for those of you, I've been paying for it because so many of you keep going there. I go and check it every once in a while. And it cost me over $100 to pay for it, but I've kept it up for the last couple of years. Dean and I did this for 2.5 years, folks. There's a lot of great information on there and good discussion with a lot of guests. Dina's real passion is to help students of the Bible recognize the Hebraic nature of the New Testament scriptures, as well as the ancient Near East world. That's the part about Dr. Dinah Dye that has enriched my biblical understanding in so many ways. Dinah and her husband, Michael, live outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and spend much of their free time with their grandchildren. Let me bring Dr. Dinah Dye in. And hi, Dinah. How are you, my friend?
Hi, Jeff. I'm doing good. Good to be here. Thanks for
Yeah,
having
it
me
is.
on.
It's good to do this again. I
Yeah,
mean, we did this for 2.5 years, a couple of breaks, but we covered so many topics and so much understanding. And I always say that you can learn a lot from a Jew. So I'm
that's good.
glad
I
you're
always say
here.
you can learn a lot from a black man, so we're even.
Okay, thank you very much. We've had Dina and I've joked about this for a couple of years, you guys. Dina, this is an important show tonight. When I spoke to you earlier today, I hung up the phone. I literally hung up the phone thinking, my God, if I could enumerate what she's going to talk about, because it was exactly what I was thinking. And of course, we're talking about identity. And so I want to start this by saying, during the process of writing the book, I started talking to all these women about the as they're connected, and you can elaborate on that in a minute. But that whole verse in the Bible, it's not good for the man to be alone. I should make for him a helpmeet. I think that has been one of the biggest misinterpretations and it caused enormous um, persecution, I would say, to women across the millennium because the understanding is not right. It's kind of like her identity was changed from why she was purpose. And of course, I believe that whole story is the introduction to Israel and the revelation of God through Israel. And we're going to talk about that tonight because this is really, really an important topic. And when I hung up the phone with you today, I was like, my God, we've been talking about the same thing that just percolates in your head has been percolating in mine for almost a year now. And it has to do with destroying the identity of anything Hebrew, which is not going to happen. But our discussion today, it just invigorated me. And I really, really think um, that the world is going after the Jewish people and they're going to run into a brick wall. I'll let you elaborate.
Well, yeah, we were talking about it earlier, and I've been thinking about this for a while because the problem for us, I mean, we just have to look around and we live in just chaos. And it doesn't matter what policy or what issue or what. We try to make sense of it and unfortunately ends up in little boxes. So, some people are freaking out over the border, which I am. Some people are freaking out over the debt, which I am. Some people are freaking over the drugs that are coming into the country, which I am. I mean, we could go on and on. But, and then we can kind of step back and say, well, what is the bigger picture? And we can talk about the global agenda and, the globalists, the cabal, the banking cabal, all the different cabals that are trying to take control. So at the bottom line, we say this is all about control. But I keep wanting to step back even farther. And, we talked about the sort of 50,000-foot view. And it occurred to me, as I was thinking about it, that at the very base of all of this is the effort to destroy the image of God in this world. Well, the image of God first through Adam, through humanity, and then Israel becomes sort of the personification then of Adam. And within that, the relationship going back to Adam between Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, it's to destroy their identity. And of course, the Jewish people, Israel, their identity in the world was to draw the nations in. So I mean, if you take out them and their identity, then where do the nations go? They don't get to see the image of God in this world. So that's sort of the bigger picture. But it all comes down to me about what is identity, what does it mean, what did God do when he created Adam and Eve, how did he give them identity, and so why is this constant um, destruction aimed at the faith community, the people of God, Israel, Adam, however you want to put it. So that's sort of the bigger picture.
Well, I like how you prefaced this morning when you said, I like to kind of go to 50,000 feet and see the big picture because I'm passionate about what's happening to the United States of America. I'm
Right.
passionate about the destruction of the church. I'm passionate about, the compromising. There's not one segment of our culture or our society that is not being flipped,
Right.
you know, whether there's too many conversations we can have about the destruction of identity
Yeah.
in our world today.
Yeah.
And as I see this chaos, here again, we're 70 years down the road from wiping the Jews off the planet. And here we are again. And that's our college students and young people who've been brainwashed, don't have a clue about the history. I literally have asked young people, and they don't have a clue what they're talking about. They're just kind of following the narrative, which
Yeah.
is to destroy the identity of the Jewish people and to raise up the identity of false people.
Yeah.
It's remarkable.
Well, for me, this has sort of been something, I have lived with my entire life, having been born and raised in a Jewish home. And I am the first generation from my dad who served overseas in the Canadian Armed Services. He went to fight in World War II when he was, I think, barely 15. He might have been 14 years old, trying to get out of the Jewish ghetto in Montreal. It was his ticket out. It lived in abject poverty. And he, at one point drove ambulances around Europe, if you could even imagine such a thing, through Belgium and Holland. He was part of the liberation for Holland, and he was also helped with the rescue at Dunkirk, and he fought in the Italian campaign. So he was quite busy in Europe. And then, I had my Uncle Max, for example, he was in a concentration camp in Poland. So this, not that they ever talked about anything, but that was always present. It was always the thing that was present at our Passover table when we went to synagogue for the high holidays or whatever. Even though it wasn't spoken of, it was always there. So for me, it was always there, and it was always a part of my identity, right? And, watching where it was 5 years ago, I believe I put out that video about Bonhoeffer. I took, from the
Right.
book by Eric Metaxas, Pastor, Prophet, Martyr, and Spy, put together a 9-part series because I could see where we were headed. I I guess part of me thought we wouldn't get there, or at least they wouldn't get there until I was long gone. And never in my wildest dreams did I think we were gonna get there this soon. So that was an important moment sort of in my ministry to recognize the signs, and here we go again. And I know we say never again, but never again, but here we are. We're just repeating. So we have to go back and look at things from the beginning if we're going to make sense of where we are today. So that's the Bible has it all. The Bible tells the whole story from
Right.
creation, on. And so if we can get a good grasp of how what God was doing through Adam and Eve and the covenant that he made with them and the identity he gave to them, and then the covenant and identity he gave to Israel, if we can kind of get a glimpse and understanding of that story, I think we're going to be better equipped to understand in a big picture what's going on today, and not get caught up. um, I mean, these are important things. I get, what's going on the campuses, but we got to step back.
Dana, as a Black person growing up, trying to find my identity because it had been eviscerated through the Islamic slave trade and then the European slave trade for the people that I represent. I represent the people that overcame that battle. And so I cherish my identity as an American because I found my root in our culture, not in the anger, if you will. But the same thing happened to the Africans. The very first thing they did, and we're going all the way back to the 7th century, was
Right.
conquer the people, divide them, erase their identity, enslave them. And we see this blueprint
Yep.
in how mankind would rule over his neighbor throughout history. It's not just a racist thing, it's not just an anti Semitic thing. It is we want to rule over you, so we have to diminish your identity. And the greatest example of that we have for 3,800 years is the history of Israel
Yeah.
and the history of the Jewish people or the Hebrew people. And so when we're talking about, this is so remarkable. The Jewish people have been scattered all over the face of the land, all over the face of the earth for 2,000 years. And yet, remarkably, not only were they chased through the cultures, through the centuries, and, horrible, horrible things happened, but they're the one people group that never lost their identity, which I find remarkable and I also find biblical. You
And
want to
the
speak to
question we
that?
have to ask is why didn't they lose their identity? And the secret,
Exactly.
or the ticket, takes us right back to the garden story. All of the elements in the garden story are the reason why Israel never lost her identity. And of course, Adam and Eve are banished, exiled from the garden for their disobedience. And we see Israel being banished, exiled out of the promised land, which is a picture of the garden, into all of these various empires. And it's what you said, what happens with empire in particular is that they rule by power and by force and by will, and turn everything within the empire and turn it into a slave empire. And when you are banished into an empire and enslaved, the thing that you lose your identity. Now, of course, for the ancient world, identity isn't the same as how we focus in on everything individually. But and I hate using this word because our brain just goes to Marxism, but it was more of a world of a collective people, not individuals. And that was the nature of the covenant. That was the nature of what God did, was always a people group. So, you'd start with a family and you move into a clan and then into a tribe and then into a nation and then into an empire. There was this sort of natural evolution of that. But a couple of things on, if we just look at the garden story, that God created a people and gave them an identity, and they were called humanity. And they were to be his image bearers, his representatives, his reflection, the reflection of who he is on earth. He made them male and female. These are all aspects of their identity. He put them into a covenant relationship with him and gave them an identity within that covenant relationship. And whenever you're in a covenant relationship, you usually exchange names. So God would be called the God of Israel, and Israel would be called the children of God. That would be one example. And he gave them other names as well. And he turned them into a family, which ultimately at Mount Sinai became a nation. And in the garden, he put them in a specific location, a garden, and he gave them an inheritance, which is land, a land for them to work. And he turned them into a dynasty, what would be an eternal dynasty. Seed would continue. And he gave them dominion. And he provided for them a vocation that they would serve and guard the garden. These are all elements of identity. And within the guarding of the garden and the serving in the garden, he instituted certain rituals and ceremonies, which in essence became like traditions, but the purpose of them was for social order and cohesion. And he did the same thing for Israel at Mount Sinai. He gave them the Torah, and it contained within it the rituals and ceremonies to draw near, which over time would become traditions, but had everything to do with social order. And then he called them, Adam and Eve, to show their allegiance to him, to worship him, he, Yahweh, their king. So all of this creates this sort of kingdom with citizenship and duty and responsibility and vocation and allegiance, and all of these elements all go into what the identity was in the beginning with Adam and Chava, and seeing them as humanity. And you can just take all the same stuff and apply it to Israel at the mountain, at Mount Sinai, after they have been delivered and set free from, the oppression in Egypt.
Well, and when the people who were returned to the land, they brought that reality with them.
Yes.
They brought their identity, they brought their history, they brought the covenant promises. These people are over there fighting for their lives. They're fighting to be a part of this here world. And
Right.
it's like the world just feeds on destroying them every 70 years. I'm reminded of Amalek, and the very fact that God said Amalek would be your enemy for every 70 years. We've certainly had that. We're 70 years down the road, and we got college students trying to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth in the modern world.
Right. Well, practically speaking, things like language, culture, traditions, history, citizenship, all these things are part of what an identity, what is an identity for a people group. And so the very unique thing about Israel, and you can't say this about any other nation, is that identity has been the glue that has held a people together and made them an identifiable people, even when they have been exiled out of their land and spread throughout, maybe the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, where normally you could not necessarily identify them. So, for example, the northern tribes, as they were exiled into Assyria, they lost their identity. And
Mhm.
Judah, you know, to the great credit of, I guess, her leaders and the structure that they had in place before they went into exile, they managed to maintain their identity, but through all of those things. But clearly, the divine hand of Yahweh is on this people group to solidify and show that identity to the whole world. So they can't just live under the radar. Like, that would be nice. Just let me live under the radar. Nobody noticed me and I can just go on with my life. But the Jewish people have always been fairly obvious. And it's because of what God has done in their culture and in their nation, so that everyone could see, because that was the point. They were supposed to draw the nations in. Well, if you can't see and you can't identify who the one is that's supposed to draw you in, that ain't going to work. So he has kept them as an identifiable people, but they've had to deal with the scourge on the other side, the anti-Semitism and the attacks and the discrimination and the marginalization and everything that goes with it.
I often say the miracle of Israel is, number one, uh, this people was created with the identity of Yahweh himself. I
Yep.
mean, virtually everything that he asked them to do represented his nature. And it's the only people group on the face of the earth that was scattered all over the world and maintained their identity. The entire biblical story, both Old and New Testament, belongs to them. And it's the only people that I know of in the history of the world to restore an ancient language
Yep.
that was lost because they were scattered. And I sit here and I go, what is so hard for people to see the miracle of what God is doing? And when we're talking about Israel, everybody's immediately talking about the Jews. When I talk about Israel, I'm talking about the place of his presence, the function and purpose of what he's doing, and the people he asked to do it. And it's so I don't see the Jewish people first. I see Elohim first, because nothing that the world has done, and I mean absolutely nothing, from Hitler, go all the way back to Babylon, the Assyrians, nothing that the Romans, nothing that the Persians have done have stopped this revelation through Israel from occurring. And I like to say all the time, and I've said it many times with you, it's just our turn. It's
Mm-hmm.
our turn to watch what God is doing through the people called Israel. And for any one of us on this planet to not see the pattern of hell being raised up against Israel, um, I can appreciate the young people who are, young people don't know much. Uh, they follow their emotion and they follow the media and they follow their next door neighbor. It's like, I remember watching this thing where they could tell somebody a lie and eventually the last person would believe the lie. And I see that kind of psychological effect happening with young people. They've been brainwashed in the college campuses to dislike the Jewish people that have been sitting next to them for 2 years in class. And and I go, and it's flipped. Like you said earlier, in my generation, I thought I'd be long gone. No, we're watching this thing happen again and again. Destroy the identity of Israel, destroy the Jewish people. That seems to be the goal all the time. Doesn't matter what point in history we're talking about. And so I equate that to destroy the identity of Yahweh, destroy his plan, destroy his purposes. I remember the dream that I had where I saw Yeshua and I saw Israel, and I was able to make them symbiotic. He was persecuted, they were persecuted. He was reviled, they were reviled. He was slaughtered, they were slaughtered. He was raised up, the nation was raised up. And so I see this symbiotic relationship, but I also see what God is going through what the Jewish people or Israel has gone through. It's kind of the same suffering when the whole world or a majority of the whole world. And folks, let me remind you, Dina and I are not having a religious conversation. We're talking about how empires want to rule over people. And the one obstacle that many of these empires have faced is Israel.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would say they face God
Yeah.
and they
And
don't
the same can
understand who
be
Israel is. Go ahead.
And the same can be said about America, and that's why I mean, that's why we're all so stressed out, and that's why, the powers that be, you know, take it George Soros or whoever you wanna, talk about, why are they, going after America? And so, yes, America, the last best hope for freedom, bastion of freedom, the place of, for the middle class, they're obviously targeting the middle class, but of course, most, the Jews that don't live in Israel live in America pretty well. I mean, we have
Right.
Jews obviously in other countries, but the vast majority, I think there's something like 900,000 Jews live in New York City. Okay, so they, so then they are resident in America, part of, how the American culture, the Judeo-Christian West. I mean, this is a very important thing that's developed over the centuries from the first century. And so, but we have, I think in talking to people and the frustration and anger and angst about what's going on in the country, and we can say, well, why are we, for example, why have we opened the borders and allowed every, person, criminal and other from on planet Earth into the nation like a Trojan horse in order, they'll come into the nation and work from the inside out in its destruction. So, I mean, I'm just doing this as an example, but for example, the Democrats would say, we're doing it to add Democrat voters. The Chamber of Commerce, the big corporations, and the Republicans would say, we want to provide cheap labor. The administrative state would say, well, we need to make up for the low birth rate because, after all, we killed all of our babies in abortion, or we're experiencing massive infertility now, probably because of the shot. The Chinese would go after it with, what they call unrestricted warfare, and they don't even have to fire a shot. And sometimes I think their response in bringing all this fentanyl in is to get back at the British and the Americans for all the opium they brought in and decimated their people and their culture. And of course, their desire to turn our nation into a bunch of unproductive addicts. And then you have Soros and the NGOs, and they would say this is all about the great replacement of the white population. So those are very real, concrete political things that people see going on and are kind of identifying it. But it's clear, step back, the goal is to destroy the American identity and all the
Right.
blessing that the American identity, through its history and its language and its culture, through its ethical and moral foundation, has brought to the rest of the world. So, and Israel, I don't really separate them now. For me, I was raised in Canada, so my dream was always to come to the United States, and I couldn't wait to get here. Now, some days I can't wait to leave, but that's another story. And that's just my heartbeat as a Jew and as an American. Like, sometimes I have a hard time sort of distinguishing between the two because I've lived in the United States my whole life, and I see the value and the brilliance of this nation, and it's just breaking my heart watching what's going on and feeling helpless to do anything.
So I'm glad you brought that up because I have where I work. I have people who say that I've sold out on my race. Those comments have kind of been bandied around. I work with predominantly white people, and I think about their perspective on that, and I go, no, I got out of my skin color in order to embrace the brilliance of this nation. You know, reading the Declaration of Independence and understanding the Bill of Rights. And I went, oh my God, this is the first nation in the history of the world where the people were promoted, and not the government, not the empire. And now
Mhm.
that's gone. I mean, it's not something that's leaving, it's something that's gone. And
I would
so
agree.
it
Yeah.
doesn't, yeah, it doesn't matter. I mean, I look at, when you look at patterns, okay, I look at what has been done to Donald Trump, and it could have been any other person. But if it had been another person, not named Donald Trump, but embraced the core values of this nation and has done what he has set out to do, it's like the whole world is trying to decapitate this man on every level, on every level. And I go, if this is a free society, that's not how a free society, and particularly this nation, has operated. I mean, sure, we went through the slave trade. It took 80 something years for us to kick that whole stupid thing out. But that thing had been formulated, and it had happened. It was like part of the cultural world to have slaves, out of Islam. And so when we defeated that under Thomas Jefferson, he fought and said, we're getting rid of this. And then Lincoln, and I sit here and I go, my God, I can embrace my nation because of what it offers us. I wrote in a book, you know, I didn't publish this book because it was really in your face. But I asked the question in the book, why are Black people always looking for an identity? You know, and I compared it to the Sammy Davis Jr. look of the 50s.
Mhm.
And then we moved into the dreadlock look of the 60s. The 70s, we had great big giant afros. The 80s, we were dripping with Jerry curl stuff. The 90s, everything was faded. And now it's all colored and blonde and blue and green. And I go, our culture is screaming for
Yeah.
identity, but
Yeah.
rejects the freedom that we literally others fought for because of anger. I have fought this my whole adult life. But when I found my identity in this country, it's like I told you in a couple of emails, it breaks my heart to see the destruction of this nation. And how's it being done? It's dismantling the nation's identity, the
Yeah.
nation's culture, the
Yeah.
nation's the nation's covenant. I mean, I look at this whole thing and I go, God, you gave a royal grant to the people screaming out for freedom, and this nation was born. And now we're, and particularly because the faith-based community has compromised the identity of the principles in the Bible. We're not even a voice in the country. We don't even have a voice in the culture in this country anymore. And so we're watching this thing fall out of the sky like a meteor. And on the other side of that is you and I get to stand guard against, do whatever we can,
Yeah.
because that's what we're called to do, take back the land.
Well, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't sort of talk about, okay, now what? And there's no question that the church has been infiltrated from the inside out with a Marxist, cultural Marxist agenda, and has, in many quarters, destroyed the church, in my opinion. I mean,
Mhm.
this using the students this in the way that they're being used today just takes us right back to the Cultural Revolution in China. Like there's nothing new here. And so this infiltration, not just of the nation, but of the church, I do blame a lot of this on the pulpits, and that's
I
probably
knew that was coming.
a whole nother show just on that, but I think it squarely goes there. And of course, that's exactly what happened in World War II. The pulpits failed miserably, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Niemöller, they actually formed another church with outside of the Lutheran Church called the Confessing Church to try
Right.
to mentor these young men, knowing that most of them were probably going to die. So I think the first thing, whenever you have a problem is admitting that you have a problem, and the reality is that our nation is gone. I know and we all have hope, and I have hope. I'm not
Right.
in despair, but we got to face the facts here. This is no longer America. This is the American empire, but it is no longer the United States of America. And it is, we live in a police state, and we have people in a gulag, and we can just make multiple comparisons with what's gone on in the Soviet Union of the past and the Chinese Communist Party of the present. Our nation has been completely overtaken by a Marxist cabal. Okay, so hello, and now it's a slow motion, but at some point it is just all going to, I don't even know what it looks like. So how are we, as in the faith community, who have an identity, hopefully understand who our identity is in the Lord, that we are his image makers, bearers, that we have a vocation, we understand what our vocation is, that we reflect that to the world and present that image. But I think we've got to start with numero uno, and that is our allegiance is to no other but God, to Yahweh. And if we don't start with that, uh, we're not going to get anywhere. So that's kind of our mission statement. Our allegiance is to no other but God. And now we have to, the next area that needs it is the transformation of the human heart, because these empires operate on that beast nature, and
Right.
God, when one is in covenant with God, he restores that beast nature into human nature. And so part of what that means, the transformation of the human heart, is our responsibility to take care, action, to take care of those in need, those are marginalized, vulnerable, etc. Learning to esteem others better than ourselves, learning what it means to serve others. And I'm speaking to myself, okay? I've not arrived. And we find our unity then through our common allegiance to God. And that's where unity, it's not through ethnicity, it's not through race, it's through our common allegiance to our creator. And
Well,
we've got to start with those things.
I would also say it's not our allegiance to religion. Um, and I say that because when you think about the things that God has asked of the Hebrew people, it was all about behavior. I mean, 90% of what God had ordained for them to do was to represent a certain behavior that really supported life and built up life. And how you did that was, don't covet your neighbor's wife, don't lie and steal from your neighbor, do unto others as you would have done unto you. I sit here and I look at some of the road rage incidents and some of the lack of civility here, and the fact that there's no discipline, there's no fathers, and I see all of these components. But but then we do have, and I have to say this too, we do have people that are serving others. We will always
Mhm.
have that,
Yeah.
but we
Yeah.
have to get. I always say, give the scriptures back to the purpose they were created for, and that is to represent the kingdom, the politics of the kingdom, the behavior of the kingdom, the order of the kingdom, the legal system of the kingdom, the love of the kingdom. See, but there's so much ignorance to this in the world. It
Well,
it
of
it, it,
course,
def- it defies logic to me how flagrantly we are when it says don't do these things. Our culture today ignores that.
yeah. Well,
But
and
go ahead.
I just, and we must speak of, Yeshua as the sort of the final summation of Adam, Israel, Yeshua. He accomplished everything they failed at. And I've been kind of fixated on the Sermon on the Mount. It just kind of blows me away. And we don't have time to really go into that. I mean, I just sort of see that as Mount Sinai 2.0, only taken he's given an interpretation that must deal with the human heart, far beyond, in some ways, even what the Torah was trying to communicate. And so that's the message of the kingdom, in real time in the New Testament. And so I think if the better we understand the principles, the guiding principles of the Sermon on the Mount, that's going to be part of our roadmap to resist empire and embrace, our community, our kingdom, the kingdom of our Lord and Messiah, for he shall reign forever and ever.
Amen.
We cannot leave that out. I mean, this is obviously a very large topic, and we could probably
Right.
go on for hours. But I don't want people to be discouraged. It's going to be a hard slog. There's going to be a lot of difficult, trying days ahead. There's going to be a lot of tears. There's going to be a lot of anguish. There's going to be a lot of suffering. And I say that because, my family experienced much of this back in, the 30s and 40s. Um, and we've got to just face it. But now we have to be able to build our local community. If God has planted you there, we've got to understand what the kingdom of heaven is on earth, and where we've been
Right.
planted, and the work that we have been called to do. And then we need to do it no matter what. And if, at the cost of our life, and I'm talking to myself. We do it with everything we've got, and we call on Him and by His Spirit to be able to accomplish the tasks He's given us.
Well, we started this program off by talking about identity, and I would agree with you 100% when we're talking about Yeshua. If the majority of the last 2,000 years would give the Messiah back his identity and understand his role and what he did in Israel in order for the light of his administration to go forth. But you have to give him back his identity.
Yeah.
We have to understand all of those things he did were in line with setting up the kingdom and serving the people. And it's not a religious thing that we need to do. It's not an educational, I got to know this and I got to know that. We just need to understand what he was doing, why he was doing it, and that he did it all in Israel with the Jewish people. Once we give that back to the history books, then some of the revelation that we've missed over the last 2,000 years pours out. And
Amen.
it just pours out. It becomes so clear when we understand that this truly is his kingdom, and all of the empires in this world will bow down to that king. Those of us who follow him, we just need to understand, number one, he was Jewish. Number one, he did everything that Moses talked about. He Adam knew exactly what was going on. Abraham understood the covenant and the role. They all knew, and nothing changed when Billy Graham came on the scene. And I don't mean that to be offensive. It, nothing changed except what was changed, but it wasn't changed by God. And that's the thing that we need to get back to. We need to get back to why God created the nation of Israel. He began this process through Adam. He did a recreation event through Noah. He restored just about everything through Christ, the Messiah. And the kingdom of God is actually being raised up all around us. If we could just see that, if we understood that, we would celebrate Israel, not try to wipe her off the map. And it just blows my mind. Dinah, I would say this: since the Jews are being attacked, I'm listening to some of the most outrageous stuff comes across the internet on me with regard to the Jews. And I go, oh my God, these people believe some of the craziest things. And yet you're Jewish. What do you do because you have to deal with this?
I found, and I don't know if this is just sort of my mechanism to deal with, I find myself just compartmentalizing it and
Mm.
detaching myself from it. Because if I actually sat there and thought about it, I guess I would just weep. And I would be so crushed in spirit to even imagine that all that my family went through in World War II feels as though it were in vain. And
Right.
so I think that's just my coping mechanism, is just to sort of detach and compartmentalize, and not sort of emotionally be so involved. I don't really, and may not be the right way to deal with it, but it just is the way that I do, because it's too much. It's just
Well,
overwhelming. And I
there
think
was
often, it could be, it likely could be me down the road. And what do I do if they come to my door for me? What will my response be? I ask myself that quite often.
I not this last January, but the January before, I felt so defeated. I was like, Lord God, I don't even know which battle to fight. And I remember in prayer time, this little whisper of a thought poured into my head said, I am the master of every outcome. I got this. It was this God was saying, this is new. This isn't new to me. Go do that little tiny part that you can do to make a difference. And so I got back in the saddle and I'm doing what we're doing. I want the folks to take a look at what we were doing. And I want you folks to, those of you who know and follow Dinah, our Returning to Eden is still up. The podcast is still up. There's 2 years of information on there. I'll keep it going as long as you folks keep going there. Carol, can you go ahead and run that video? And then when we come back, Dina, I'll give you the last word.
Okay.
Hello, and welcome to the Returning to Eden podcast, a podcast that seeks to examine the culture, context, and language of the Bible from the perspective of the ancient world. We are the product of history, not a new idea. And now, here are the hosts of the Returning to Eden podcast, Jeff Morton and Dr. Dinah Dye.
Again, that
Cool.
podcast is still up. Yeah, it's still up, Dina. And, I had a lot of fun doing that. And I learned so much. You taught me how to look at scholarship and to consider the academic researchers as opposed to just the Sunday sermon and whatever I could glean out of the scriptures. And I got to tell you, I met some wacky people through your stuff, but I've also met some people who, not even believers, and they have great information about the historical account of
Yes.
the ancient world.
Yes.
So it just turned on a light for me and it was great. And I so appreciate that. I embrace that. I call you my mentor because you exposed me to people out there that were studying the temple or that were studying just the minutia of little things that made me understand the kingdom of God as opposed to the religious systems that we all learned through. And I'm just absolutely grateful for that because it's radically changed the way I look at the scriptures. I hate having religious conversations, so thank you for that. And folks, it's
been a
called
pleasure.
RTE, Returning to Eden.podbean, RTE.podbean.com. If you go there and you listen to the shows, I'll pay for it again. Dina, you can have the last word.
Well, I think the main thing I want people to embrace is understand the reality on the ground. It is what you're seeing. All the wishing and hoping in the world is not going to change it. This thing is snowballing. Yes, we could have a great revival, and yes, we need to pray for that. But I also want you to recognize that we are headed for some really, really dark times. However, in that, I want you to make sure that you understand what your identity is in Yeshua the Messiah, in serving God. And the number one aspect of you are his image bearer. You have been given vocation as his image bearer. But the number one thing is, where is your allegiance? This is no time for compromise. This is no time to wimp out. This is the time for courage, to exercise courage and strength and boldness. And our allegiance belongs to him and him alone and no other. And I think that's an important component of who your identity is in him. And I think all the rest will follow. And if you allow him to, within that expression of allegiance, in that covenant relationship, you allow him to transform your heart, there isn't anything that you need to worry about.
Amen. My sister has written here in the chat to echo what you said earlier a moment ago. She says, I met a Jewish woman who said something so profound to me. She said, can you imagine what it's like to live knowing someone is trying to kill you all the time? Dina, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. It was great to be here. We'll have to do
Yeah,
this
this
again
is fun.
sometime.
I would love to do it again, and maybe we'll do a podcast, or because I can still do that too. We still have that ability. Stay
Okay.
safe, stay in prayer,
Thank
and
you.
and embrace hope, because that's what Messiah gave all of us.
Amen.
All right,
Amen.
all right,
All right.
folks, that's it. Dina and I've talked about it. Now we're done. Have a good evening. I want to thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next week. I don't know who's going to be on next week. I never know who's going to be on. But at the same time, hang in there. If you believe in the Messiah, then hang in there, keep looking up, and embrace your identity and what he did for all of us. This is Jeff. Good night.